The ballroom glittered beneath thousands of golden lights. Cameras flashed endlessly as some of the world's most admired entertainers gathered for a prestigious charity gala. The event was meant to celebrate kindness, generosity, and the power of helping others. Yet before the night ended, one painful moment would leave an entire room speechless, and one quiet act of courage would change everything. Keanu Reeves arrived without fanfare. Like always, he greeted staff members before greeting celebrities. He shook hands with security guards, thanked volunteers, and even helped an elderly guest find her seat. Most people didn't notice. That's how Keanu preferred it. A few minutes later, Sandra Bullock entered the ballroom. The audience welcomed her warmly. She smiled graciously and took her place near the stage. Everything seemed perfect, but hidden beneath the glamorous atmosphere, tensions were already growing. Near the front sat Victor Hale, a wealthy businessman who had donated millions to sponsor the gala. He was known for his influence, his wealth, and his habit of getting exactly what he wanted. Tonight would be no different, or so he thought. As dinner was served, guests enjoyed conversations and laughter. Sandra spoke with young filmmakers seated nearby, encouraging them to follow their dreams despite setbacks. Success isn't about never failing, she told them. It's about refusing to quit. The young artists listened carefully. Across the room, Victor watched the interaction with visible annoyance. One organizer approached him. "Is everything okay, Mr. Hale?" Victor forced a smile perfectly, but his eyes said otherwise. A few moments later, Keanu noticed something unusual. Victor leaned toward another guest and whispered something. The guest's face immediately changed. Shock, then discomfort, then silence. Whatever Victor had said clearly wasn't pleasant. Keanu couldn't hear the conversation, but he sensed trouble approaching. Soon the evening program began. The host welcomed everyone and announced that Sandra would present the gala's most important award, an award honoring community leaders who had transformed lives through acts of kindness. The audience applauded. Sandra walked confidently toward the stage. She adjusted the microphone and smiled. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight is about recognizing people who choose compassion even when nobody is watching." Suddenly, a voice interrupted her. Perhaps someone else should present this award. The room froze. Victor Hale had stood up. Sandra blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry?" Victor crossed his arms. "I simply think this event should focus on genuine contributors." Whispers spread across the ballroom. Nobody understood. Sandra remained calm. "I believe that's exactly why we're here." Victor laughed quietly. "Are we?" The tension became unbearable. Many guests stared at their tables. Others looked toward the stage helplessly. No one wanted to challenge the gala's biggest sponsor. For several painful seconds, Sandra stood alone. Then another chair moved. Keanu Reeves stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. He simply walked toward the stage. The room watched silently. When he reached the microphone, he paused. Then he spoke. "There's something I've learned over the years." His calm voice echoed through the ballroom. "Kindness doesn't need attention." The audience listened carefully, but disrespect usually demands it. Victor's smile faded. Keanu continued. "The strongest people I've met aren't those with the most money or influence." He glanced toward Sandra. "They're the people who lift others up." A few guests began applauding. Then more joined. Soon the entire room erupted into applause. Several people stood, then dozens more. Sandra looked overwhelmed, not because of the applause, because someone had chosen courage when silence would have been easier. Victor sat down slowly for the first time all evening. He looked uncertain, yet the biggest surprise was still coming. As the applause faded, an elderly woman approached the stage from the back of the ballroom. Most guests didn't recognize her, neither did Sandra, but Victor's face suddenly turned pale. The woman carried a small envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. "I need to say something," she said. The room quieted again. Victor immediately stood. "This isn't part of the program." The woman ignored him. She turned toward Sandra, then toward Keanu, and finally toward the audience. "I've spent 10 years waiting for the courage to speak." A chill swept through the room. Nobody understood what was happening. The woman opened the envelope. Inside were several old photographs. What happened tonight reminded me of something. Victor looked terrified. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. The woman raised one. Photograph. This man isn't who people think he is, gasps echoed across the ballroom. Victor stepped forward. That's enough. But the woman continued, and as Keanu watched carefully, he realized that whatever secret she carried could change far more than tonight's event. The glamorous gala had suddenly become something much bigger, something nobody in the room had expected, and the truth was only beginning to emerge. The ballroom remained silent. No one moved. The elegant music had stopped, conversations had vanished, and every pair of eyes was fixed on the elderly woman standing near the stage. In her trembling hands was a faded photograph that seemed to carry decades of untold memories. Victor Hale's confident smile had disappeared. For the first time that evening, the powerful businessman looked frightened. "Please," Victor said, forcing a calm voice. "This is a charity event. Let's not turn it into something inappropriate." The woman looked directly at him. "I stayed quiet for 10 years because I believed fear was stronger than truth." She slowly lifted the photograph. "But tonight, I finally realized I was wrong." The audience leaned forward. Keanu remained beside Sandra without saying a word. He wasn't there to take the spotlight. He simply wanted to make sure no one who had been unfairly treated had to stand alone. Sandra quietly whispered, "Something tells me this isn't just about tonight." Keanu nodded. "I think you're right." The elderly woman introduced herself. "My name is Eleanor." Her voice shook, but her eyes were determined. "Many years ago, I directed a small community center for children who had lost their homes after a terrible wildfire." Several guests exchanged curious looks. Eleanor continued. "We received promises of donations from wealthy sponsors. One of them was Victor Hale." Victor immediately interrupted. "I've donated millions over the years." "You have," Eleanor replied calmly. "But that's not the whole story." Heavy silence filled the ballroom. The donation everyone applauded never reached the children. Soft gasps spread across the audience. Victor laughed nervously. "That's a ridiculous accusation." Eleanor carefully unfolded another paper. "I kept copies." The room grew even quieter. She revealed old financial records showing that funds intended for rebuilding classrooms had mysteriously disappeared before the project could begin. No one knew whether the missing money was the result of fraud, negligence, or poor management, but the unanswered questions alone stunned the audience. Victor quickly stepped toward the stage. "Those papers prove nothing." Before anyone could respond, the ballroom lights suddenly flickered. Then the giant screen behind the stage unexpectedly turned on. No one had touched it. Instead of the event logo, an old video began playing. The footage showed children laughing outside the community center years earlier. A younger Eleanor appeared, thanking volunteers. Then another familiar face appeared, Keanu Reeves. The audience looked at him in surprise. Sandra smiled softly. "You never told anyone?" Keanu looked almost embarrassed. "There wasn't anything to tell." The video revealed Keanu quietly helping volunteers paint classrooms, carry furniture and serve meals. No interviews, no photographers, no publicity, just simple acts of kindness that the audience watched in complete silence. The recording ended with one sentence spoken by Eleanor years ago. "Some heroes never ask to be noticed." The ballroom erupted into heartfelt applause. Keanu lowered his head modestly. "It's not about me," he said quietly. "It's about those kids." Sandra smiled. "That's exactly why it matters." As emotions settled, another surprise arrived. One of the young filmmakers attending the gala cautiously approached the stage. "My name is Daniel." He held an old notebook. "I think I know why that video appeared." Everyone looked at him. Daniel explained that his late grandfather had volunteered at Eleanor's community center before passing away. He had left Daniel a box labeled, "Open only when the truth matters more than comfort." Daniel admitted he had brought the box to the gala because he planned to donate its contents to a museum honoring community volunteers. "I never imagined tonight would happen." Inside the box were photographs, handwritten letters from children, and several unopened envelopes, One envelope had Victor. Hale's name written on it. Victor's face turned pale once. Again, Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, dated nearly a decade earlier. It wasn't addressed to Victor. It was from him. The letter revealed that Victor had once privately admitted feeling responsible for serious mistakes involving the community project. It did not confess to a crime, but it expressed deep regret over decisions that had harmed vulnerable families and promised to make things right someday. The audience was stunned. Victor slowly lowered his head. For several seconds, he said nothing, then quietly he spoke. "I never thought anyone would find that." Sandra stepped closer. "You still have a chance to explain." Victor looked around the ballroom. For years, people had admired his wealth. Tonight they were waiting to hear his honesty. He took a deep breath. "I wasn't the man people believed I was." The room remained silent. "I chased success so aggressively that I stopped asking whether my decisions were hurting people. I signed papers without paying enough attention. I trusted the wrong people. When the community center failed to receive everything it had been promised, I convinced myself it was too late to fix." He paused. "And instead of facing my mistakes, I buried them. No one applauded, no one criticized him, they simply listened." Victor turned toward Eleanor. "I can't change what happened." A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek. "No." He swallowed hard. "But maybe I can change what happens next." Keanu watched quietly. He had seen something rare. Not perfection, but the beginning of accountability. Just as it seemed the evening had reached its emotional peak, one of the event organizers hurried onto the stage, holding a tablet. "Excuse me, everyone needs to see this." She connected it to the large screen. A live news broadcast appeared. Reporters were standing outside the ballroom, but they weren't covering the confrontation. They were covering something else entirely. Across the city, hundreds of former students from Eleanor's community center had begun gathering after hearing fragments of the story online. Teachers, doctors, firefighters, engineers, artists, parents, people whose lives had been shaped by that little center years ago. Each carried a candle. Each had come for the same reason, not to condemn anyone, but to honor the place and the people that had given them hope when they had almost none. Sandra looked out toward the audience, tears in her eyes. Keanu quietly smiled. Sometimes, he thought, one act of kindness echoes much farther than anyone can imagine. But none of them knew that before sunrise, one final revelation would transform the entire night into something no one would ever forget. The ballroom remained silent as the live broadcast continued to play across the enormous screen. Outside, hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the evening sky, each holding a single candle. Some were elderly, others were young professionals. Many had brought their own children. None of them had come because of a celebrity. They had come because years ago, a small community center had given them hope when life had almost taken everything away. The cameras interviewed one woman in her 30s. "I lost my parents in the wildfire," she said softly. "That center gave me books, food, and people who believed in me. Tonight I heard its story was finally being remembered. I couldn't stay home." Another man smiled while holding his daughter's hand. "I learned to read there. Today I'm a teacher because someone refused to give up on us." Inside the ballroom, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Sandra quietly wiped away a tear. Keanu looked toward Eleanor. She wasn't crying because people finally knew the truth. She was crying because the children she once cared for had never forgotten her. Just then, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "This gala was supposed to celebrate generosity," he said. "I think we've just witnessed its true meaning." The audience applauded warmly. Then he surprised everyone. "We are changing tonight's program." The room grew quiet once more. "The remaining awards can wait." He smiled. "Some moments are more important than trophies." The audience rose to their feet in agreement. For the first time in the gala's history, the formal ceremony was paused, not because of controversy, but because compassion had become the evening's greatest story. Meanwhile, Victor Hale remained seated alone. His expensive suit, polished shoes, and reputation no longer mattered. He stared at the old photographs Eleanor had placed on the table, children painting classrooms, volunteers serving meals, simple moments he had almost erased through years of silence. Keanu slowly walked toward him. Victor looked up. "I suppose you're here to tell me how disappointed you are." Keanu shook his head. "No." Victor seemed confused. "I've learned something," Keanu said quietly. "People make mistakes." Victor laughed bitterly. "You call this a mistake? I call it a choice." Victor lowered his eyes. "And every choice creates another one." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Victor whispered, "Do you think people can forgive someone like me?" Keanu answered honestly, "I don't know." Victor's shoulders dropped. "But forgiveness isn't where change begins." Victor looked back at him. "It begins when you stop asking people to forget and start giving them reasons to believe." Those simple words landed harder than any public criticism could have. An hour later, the ballroom doors opened. The organizers invited everyone outside. Celebrities, volunteers, journalists, hotel staff, musicians, and guests walked together toward the growing crowd. No VIP entrance, no reserved section. Everyone stood together. Sandra joined Eleanor near the front. "You spent years building hope," Sandra told her. "Tonight, hope found its way back to you." Eleanor smiled through tears. "I thought everyone had forgotten." Sandra gently squeezed her hand. "Kindness is rarely forgotten." Across the crowd, reporters expected dramatic interviews. Instead, they witnessed something unexpected. Keanu quietly picked up a cardboard box filled with candles and began handing them to people one by one. No speeches, no cameras invited, just simple kindness. A young reporter noticed him. "Mr. Reeves," Keanu smiled politely, "tonight isn't about me, but people want your reaction." "My reaction?" He looked toward Eleanor and the former students. "I think you've already seen it." Then he walked away before another question could be asked. The reporter lowered her microphone. Some stories didn't need dramatic headlines, they simply needed honest moments. As midnight approached, Daniel, the young filmmaker, returned carrying another envelope from his grandfather's memory box. "I almost forgot." He handed it to Eleanor. "It has your name on it." She slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter dated nearly 15 years earlier. It had been written by dozens of children from the community center. Each had signed their name. Some signatures were neat. Others were written in shaky handwriting. One sentence appeared again and again. "Thank you for believing in us before we believed in ourselves." Eleanor covered her mouth. "I never received this," Daniel smiled. "My grandfather planned to give it to you after the center reopened." He paused. But it never happened. Sandra quietly read several names, then something caught her attention. One signature belonged to a little boy named Lucas. She looked toward the crowd. A firefighter standing beside one of the trucks slowly raised his hand. "That's me." He stepped forward. "I wrote that." Everyone turned toward him. "When I was 9 years old, I wanted to quit school." He smiled at Eleanor. "You told me heroes don't always wear uniforms." He looked down at his firefighter jacket. "I remembered." The crowd applauded. Then another voice spoke. "I'm Emily." A doctor stepped forward. "I learned science in that little classroom." Then another. "I'm Noah." "I'm Grace." "I'm Olivia." One after another, former students came forward, each sharing a small piece of how the community center had shaped their lives. No speech lasted longer than a minute. None needed to. Together they painted a picture no award ceremony ever could. Victor watched everything from a distance. Finally, he walked toward the microphone. "I know I cannot rewrite history." The crowd became quiet. "But I refuse to let this story end with regret." He handed the organizers a folder. Inside was a legal commitment establishing an independent charitable foundation, not under his name, but dedicated to rebuilding community learning centers in disaster-affected towns. The foundation would be managed by an independent board, including educators, volunteers, and community representatives, to ensure transparency and accountability. "I don't deserve applause," Victor said. "I only hope that someday the children helped through this work will never have to know my name." Silence filled the air. Then Eleanor stepped forward. She didn't praise him, she didn't excuse the past. Instead, she simply said, "If you keep this promise, let your actions tell the rest of the story." Victor nodded. "I will." Several months later. The headlines had faded. Television crews had moved on, but something remarkable had quietly begun. The first new community learning center opened in a small town, recovering from devastating floods. Children filled its library, parents attended evening classes. Volunteers painted colorful murals on the walls. Near the entrance stood a simple wooden plaque. It didn't mention celebrities, it didn't mention sponsors. It carried only one message. One act of respect can inspire another. One act of kindness can change generations. On opening day, Keanu and Sandra visited quietly without publicity. They spent the afternoon reading stories to children, helping arrange books, and speaking with volunteers. Before leaving, they slipped out through a side door, smiling as the laughter inside continued without them. Because they understood something many people spend a lifetime chasing. Fame creates attention, success creates admiration, but kindness creates a legacy. And long after the cameras stop rolling and the applause fades away, a legacy built. On Compassion continues to change lives, one heart, one choice, and one quiet act of courage at a time.